Seoul
Happy
had a way of making
anniversary.
dreams look closer than they really were.
Find out what she values
Every
more than
morning,
money.
the city awakened beneath rivers of glass towers,
Happy
crowded subway
anniversary.
platforms,
You
and
too.
cafes filled
Find
with
out what
people
she
chasing
values more than
futures they
money.
could barely afford. Among those
Happy
millions
anniversary.
were two people
You
who
too.
believed love could survive
Find out what
anything.
she values more than money.
Ji-hoon and Kang Soo-jin had been married
Happy
for 4
anniversary.
years. They
You
lived
too.
in a modest apartment
Find out what
tucked
she
inside
values
a
more than
quiet
money.
neighborhood overlooking the Han River. It wasn't
Happy
luxurious.
anniversary.
The
You too.
wallpaper had begun
Find
to
out
fade.
what she values more than
The
money.
kitchen was small enough that they often bumped into each
Happy
other while
anniversary.
making breakfast.
You too.
The balcony barely
Find
held
out what she
2
values
chairs,
more than money.
but every corner carried evidence of a life
Happy
they had built
anniversary.
together.
You too.
Framed photographs from
Find out
rainy
what she
dates,
values more than money.
handwritten anniversary notes. A bookshelf filled with novels they had promised to read together, but never found the time to finish. Neither of them came from wealth. Ji-hoon worked as a restoration architect, spending his days preserving historic Korean buildings that others no longer noticed. He believed old things deserved a second chance. Soo-jin was a documentary photographer. She wandered the streets of Seoul capturing ordinary lives that most people hurried past without seeing. She believed every stranger carried a story worth remembering. Their careers paid little. Some months, they counted every one before buying groceries. Other months, they laughed while eating instant noodles on the apartment floor because the dining table had finally broken beyond repair. Yet somehow, those evenings became their happiest memories. Because poverty had never embarrassed them. Losing each other did. As autumn settled over Seoul, they celebrated another wedding anniversary. There were no expensive gifts. No luxury hotel. No grand celebration. Just a homemade dinner. 2 candles. And the quiet certainty that whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it together. Neither of them noticed the black luxury sedan that slowed outside their apartment building. Inside, a distinguished man in his 60s quietly looked toward their illuminated balcony. He wasn't watching their home. He was watching Soo-jin. For reasons neither of them could possibly imagine. The following morning arrived with a gentle autumn mist settling over Seoul. The city resumed its relentless rhythm. Commuters hurried through subway stations. Coffee shops filled before sunrise. Construction cranes stretched above the skyline. Life moved forward, unaware that 2 ordinary lives were about to change forever. Ji-hoon spent his morning inside Cheongdeokgung Palace, carefully inspecting centuries-old wooden beams that had survived generations of storms. His hands moved with patience. Every crack in the timber told a story. Every restoration was an act of respect for the past. He often wondered why people valued new things more than old ones. Perhaps because repairing what was broken demanded more love than replacing it. Across the city, Soo-jin wandered through Ixieandong, her camera hanging gently from her shoulder. She wasn't searching for famous landmarks. She searched for emotion. An elderly couple sharing one umbrella. A little flower growing through a crack in the pavement. A street musician smiling despite an empty donation box. Her photographs weren't beautiful because of perfect lighting. They were beautiful because they captured quiet truths. As she lowered her camera after photographing an elderly florist arranging fresh chrysanthemums, a luxury vehicle rolled silently to a stop across the street. The rear window lowered only halfway. The distinguished man from the previous night remained seated inside. He didn't call out to her. He simply watched. Not with obsession. Not with desire. But with careful curiosity. For several seconds, their eyes met. Soo-jin offered the polite smile she often gave strangers before continuing her walk, unaware that she had just been quietly evaluated. The sedan disappeared into traffic. That evening, the couple met at a small riverside cafe overlooking the Han River. They talked about ordinary things. A leaking kitchen faucet. An upcoming photography exhibition. A restoration project that had exceeded its budget. They laughed. Not because life was easy, but because they had learned that happiness often lived inside ordinary conversations. As they prepared to leave, a sharply dressed assistant approached their table. He respectfully bowed and handed Ji-hoon a heavy cream-colored envelope embossed with a gold seal. There was no company name. No sender. Only a handwritten note. Mr. Kim Ji-hoon, someone would like to discuss an opportunity that could change both of your lives forever. For 3 days. The envelope remained unopened on the corner of their dining table. Neither Ji-hoon nor Soo-jin mentioned it. Yet, every time they walked past it, their eyes lingered for a second longer. It wasn't curiosity that unsettled them. It was possibility. Their landlord had called twice that week. The building was being sold. Rent would increase before the end of the month. Ji-hoon's restoration project had been suspended after government funding was unexpectedly cut. Half his team had already been laid off. Soo-jin's documentary exhibition had attracted praise from critics. But not a single buyer. Awards decorated her portfolio. Bills filled her mailbox. That evening, rain tapped softly against their apartment windows. The electricity flickered once before settling into silence. The couple sat on the living room floor, sharing takeout noodles because the dining table they had repaired so many times had finally collapsed beyond repair. For a while, neither of them spoke. The weight of adulthood had quietly entered their home. Not with anger. Not with arguments. But with exhaustion. Ji-hoon looked around the apartment. Every repaired chair. Every patched curtain. Every delayed dream. Reminded him that love alone could not pay tomorrow's bills. Across from him, Soo-jin gently reached for his hand. She didn't offer solutions. She simply held it. Sometimes, the greatest comfort isn't finding the right words. It's reminding someone they don't have to carry the burden alone. As Ji-hoon squeezed her fingers, his eyes drifted toward the unopened envelope. For the first time, he stood up, walked slowly across the room, and broke the wax seal. Inside, there was only one invitation. No explanation. No contract. No promise. Just a handwritten message. Dinner tomorrow, 7:00 p.m. The Jade Pavilion, Mount Namsan. At the bottom, a signature. Chairman Kwon Tae-sung. One of the wealthiest and most influential businessmen in South Korea. The room fell silent. Neither of them had ever met him. Neither of them understood why a man, who could buy entire city blocks, wanted dinner with two ordinary people. The Jade Pavilion stood high above Seoul, nestled against the quiet slopes of Namsan Mountain. Its architecture blended traditional Korean elegance with modern luxury. Soft lanterns illuminated the stone pathways. A gentle breeze carried the scent of pine trees through the open courtyards. Everything about the place whispered exclusivity. Guests arrived in chauffeur-driven cars. Business leaders dined behind private screens. Conversations remained low. Discreet. Power never announced itself here. It simply existed. Ji-hoon and Soo-jin exchanged a brief glance before stepping inside. They felt out of place. Not because of how they were dressed, but because this world had never belonged to them. An attendant led them through a series of private corridors until they reached a secluded dining room overlooking the glowing Seoul skyline. The sliding wooden doors opened. A distinguished man rose from the table. Chairman Kwon Tae-sung. He appeared to be in his early 60s. His silver hair was neatly combed. His tailored charcoal suit carried no visible brand, yet every detail reflected quiet wealth. His expression was composed. His eyes, however, held a loneliness that money had never managed to erase. He welcomed them warmly. No bodyguards entered the room. No assistants remained nearby. The three of them shared a simple meal prepared with remarkable care. To Ji-hoon's surprise, the chairman never spoke about business. Instead, he asked about architecture. He admired Ji-hoon's passion for restoring forgotten places. He spoke to Soo-jin about her documentary photography, recalling one of her exhibitions with details only someone who had truly studied her work could know. Hours passed. The conversation flowed naturally. The couple slowly relaxed. For a moment, they forgot they were sitting across from one of the richest men in Korea. Then, as dessert was served, Chairman Kwon gently placed a small velvet box on the table. Inside wasn't jewelry. It was an old, faded photograph. A young woman, standing beside a cherry blossom tree. Soo-jin stared at the photograph. Something about the woman's smile felt strangely familiar. Chairman Kwon looked toward the city lights before quietly saying, "She was the love of my life." The warmth in the room faded into silence. Whatever this meeting had truly been about, it was only now beginning. The room became unusually still. Chairman Kwon's fingers rested gently on the faded photograph, as though even after decades, he was afraid time might take it away from him. Outside the panoramic windows, the lights of Seoul shimmered beneath the quiet night sky. Inside, three lives were slowly beginning to intertwine. Chairman Kwon looked at Soo-jin with calm, respectful eyes. There was no obsession. No inappropriate admiration. Only a sadness that had never truly healed. The young woman in the photograph had been his fiancée more than 35 years earlier. Before they could marry, she had died unexpectedly during a humanitarian mission abroad. Everything he had built afterward, the corporations, the hotels, the fortune, none of it had filled the emptiness she left behind. Years later, while visiting a small photography exhibition in Seoul, he had stopped in front of one particular image. A photograph of an elderly woman smiling beneath falling cherry blossoms. The photographer's name was Kang Soo-jin. Something about the emotion captured in that image reminded him so deeply of the woman he had lost that he spent months quietly learning about the artist behind the lens. Not to interfere with her life. Not to possess her. But to understand how someone so young could preserve emotions that most people no longer noticed. Ji-hoon listened without interrupting. The sincerity in the chairman's voice was impossible to ignore. Then Chairman Kwon slowly reached into his briefcase. This time, he removed a thick blue presentation folder. Inside were architectural drawings, investment reports, and legal documents. He slid them gently across the polished table toward Ji-hoon. The proposal wasn't for Soo-jin. It wasn't even personal. It was professional. Chairman Kwon wanted Ji-hoon to lead the restoration of an abandoned cultural village outside Seoul, a project worth hundreds of billions of won, that would preserve Korean history for future generations. It was the opportunity Ji-hoon had dreamed about his entire career. But there was one condition. The project would require complete dedication. At least 2 years. Living on site. Far from Seoul. Far from everything familiar. Far from Soo-jin. The chairman folded his hands. His expression remained gentle. He wasn't buying a marriage. He was asking a husband whether he was willing to sacrifice time with the woman he loved. To build the legacy he had always wanted. The question lingered in the silence between them. And neither Ji-hoon nor Soo-jin was ready to answer it. The drive home was unusually quiet. Rain traced slow paths across the windshield as Seal's lights blurred into streaks of gold and white. Neither Ji-hoon nor Soo-jin reached for the radio. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was thoughtful. Each of them was carrying the same question. Would love survive a dream finally coming true? Back inside their apartment, the blue presentation folder rested on the coffee table. Neither of them opened it again. Instead, Soo-jin disappeared into the small kitchen and prepared 2 cups of hot tea. The familiar ritual calmed her. She watched the steam rise into the air, wishing life could remain as simple as that. Ji-hoon stood alone on the balcony. The city stretched endlessly before him. For years, he had imagined receiving an opportunity exactly like this. A project that could define his career. A chance to restore an entire cultural village instead of repairing isolated buildings one by one. It was everything he had worked toward. So why did it suddenly feel so heavy? Inside the apartment, Soo-jin quietly opened one of her photography albums. Its pages held memories from the last 4 years. Their first rented apartment. Weekend train trips to Busan. Cherry blossoms in spring. Snowfall outside Gyeongbokgung Palace. Ordinary moments that had somehow become priceless. She realized something that frightened her. Every photograph she treasured had one thing in common. Ji-hoon was in every chapter of her happiest memories. She closed the album slowly. For the first time, she wondered what future memories would look like if he wasn't standing beside her. The following afternoon, Ji-hoon visited the restoration site proposed by Chairman Kwon. Nestled in the mountains outside Seoul, the abandoned village stood in breathtaking silence. Ancient hanok houses waited patiently beneath towering pine trees. Stone pathways disappeared beneath fallen leaves. Centuries of Korean history were slowly fading away. As Ji-hoon walked through the empty village, his fingertips brushed against weathered wooden pillars. He could almost hear the echoes of families who had once lived there. For an architect devoted to preserving history, it wasn't just a project. It was a calling. Standing alone in the middle of the deserted village, he finally understood why refusing the offer felt almost impossible. The message stayed on Ji-hoon's screen long after the vibration stopped. He read it again. Then again. There was no urgency in Chairman Kwon's words. No pressure. Only a quiet certainty that another piece of the story remained hidden. The next morning, Ji-hoon accepted an invitation to visit Kwon Cultural Foundation, a private museum dedicated to preserving Korea's architectural history. The building itself was a masterpiece. Natural light poured through towering glass walls. Ancient wooden carvings stood beside modern steel sculptures. Past and present existed together in perfect harmony. Chairman Kwon waited near a scale model of the abandoned village. He didn't begin with contracts. He began with memories. The restoration project, he explained, had never been intended to generate profit. Years earlier, the government had planned to demolish the village and replace it with luxury vacation homes. Chairman Kwon had quietly purchased the land to protect it. For almost a decade, he searched for someone capable of restoring it without destroying its soul. Architects came. Consultants came. Developers came. Most saw opportunity. Very few saw history. Then he discovered Ji-hoon's restoration work. Not through awards. Not through recommendations. But through photographs of forgotten temples and old wooden homes that Ji-hoon had restored with remarkable patience. You don't repair buildings, the chairman said softly. You preserve memories. Those words settled deeply inside Ji-hoon. For the first time in years, Someone had understood why he loved his work. Later that afternoon, across the city, Soo-jin prepared for the opening of her newest photography exhibition. Visitors admired her images. Art critics praised her eye for emotion. Yet one photograph attracted more attention than all the others. It was a quiet portrait of Ji-hoon standing beneath falling cherry blossoms, smiling without realizing she had taken the picture. People saw a beautiful composition. Soo-jin saw home. As she stood silently watching strangers admire the photograph, a thought she had tried to ignore finally reached her heart. If Ji-hoon accepted the project, would his greatest dream slowly become the distance that changed them forever? He wasn't dressed like a billionaire today. A simple wool coat, comfortable walking shoes, no security, no assistants. He looked less like one of Korea's most powerful men, and more like an aging man carrying years of quiet regret. He stopped a respectful distance away. Then he said something that neither Ji-hoon nor Soo-jin had expected. "I don't want to take your husband away from you." The words lingered in the cool autumn air. "I know what it feels like to lose the person you love," he continued. "If this project costs you your marriage, then I have already failed." Soo-jin looked at him in silence. For the first time, she realized this had never been a test designed by a wealthy man. It was a burden carried by someone who had spent decades wishing he had made different choices. Soo-jin answered the phone before it could ring a second time. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them carried more emotion than words ever could. Then Ji-hoon finally broke it. His voice was steady, gentle, certain. He had made his decision. He was going to decline Chairman Kwon's offer. Not because the project wasn't extraordinary. Not because he lacked courage. But because every version of the future he imagined felt incomplete without Soo-jin standing beside him. He refused to build a legacy while slowly losing the person who had given his life meaning. Soo-jin closed her eyes. Tears gathered before she could stop them. She had spent days convincing herself that loving someone meant letting them go if it helped them become who they were meant to be. Now, the man she loved had chosen her instead of his greatest dream. Her heart should have felt relieved. Instead, it felt unbearably heavy. Because deep inside, she knew what that dream had meant to him. When she returned home that evening, Ji-hoon was already waiting. The unsigned contract lay neatly on the coffee table. Without hesitation, he folded it carefully, placed it back inside its envelope, and smiled. It was the same warm smile that had comforted her through years of uncertainty. "We'll find another dream," his eyes seemed to say. But Soo-jin couldn't smile back. She saw something he couldn't hide. A tiny flicker of disappointment. So small that most people would never notice it. She noticed. Because she had spent 4 years memorizing every expression on his face. That night, long after Ji-hoon had fallen asleep, Soo-jin quietly sat alone by the apartment window. Below her, Seoul continued moving without pause. Thousands of strangers chased success, others chased love. Some tried desperately to hold on to both. She finally understood the cruelest truth about sacrifice. Sometimes, the person making the sacrifice isn't the one who gives something up. It's the one who quietly watches someone else abandon their dream because they love you too much. As dawn approached, Soo-jin reached for her phone. She opened Chairman Kwon's business card. Her thumb hovered over the call button. For several long seconds, she hesitated. Then, she pressed it. Chairman Kwon answered almost immediately. His voice was calm. He sounded as though he had expected the call, not because he had been waiting for it, but because he understood how difficult decisions often arrived in the quiet hours before dawn. Soo-jin stood by the window, watching the first rays of sunlight spread across the Han River. Her voice trembled. Not with fear. With love. She asked him one question. Is there truly no way for Ji-hoon to accept the project without losing the life we've built together? There was a long silence. Chairman Kwon didn't answer right away. He walked to the large window of his own office overlooking Seoul. For years, he had believed every difficult decision demanded a painful sacrifice. Perhaps that belief had cost him more than he realized. Finally, he spoke. There may be another way. The words barely left his lips before Soo-jin turned around, hope flickering in her eyes. Chairman Kwon explained that the original plan required Ji-hoon to live in the mountain village because previous project directors had treated it like ordinary construction work. But Ji-hoon wasn't an ordinary architect. He was building something that would last for generations. Perhaps the project itself needed to change. Over the following week, Chairman Kwon called an emergency meeting with the foundation's board. Several executives strongly opposed revising the project. It would increase costs. It would delay completion. Some even argued that accommodating one architect's personal life was unprofessional. Chairman Kwon listened quietly. Then he closed the meeting with a single sentence. If preserving old buildings matters, then preserving the people who give those buildings meaning matters even more. The room fell silent. His decision was final. The restoration project would move forward under a completely new structure. A team of specialists would rotate between Seoul and the village. Modern technology would allow much of the planning to be done remotely. Ji-hoon would still lead the restoration. But he wouldn't have to give up his marriage to do it. Sometimes, the greatest act of leadership isn't asking people to sacrifice more. It's refusing to force them to choose between the work they love and the people they love. The evening sky glowed in soft shades of amber as Chairman Kwon's car quietly pulled into the narrow street outside Ji-hoon and Soo-jin's apartment. For the first time since they had met him, there was no distance between wealth and simplicity. No assistants opened the car door. No security detail surrounded him. He carried only a slim leather portfolio and a quiet smile. When Ji-hoon welcomed him inside, Chairman Kwon paused for a moment. His eyes wandered across the small apartment. The patched bookshelf. The repaired dining table, now carefully fixed once again. The photographs lining the walls. Nothing about the home was expensive. Yet everything about it felt alive. He smiled softly. This, he said, is something money has never been able to buy. The three of them sat together over cups of warm tea. Chairman Kwon opened the portfolio. Inside was a completely revised proposal. Ji-hoon would remain the lead restoration architect. A permanent design studio would be established in Seoul. The mountain village would have an on-site restoration team, while Ji-hoon would travel only when his expertise was required. The project timeline would be extended to protect the quality of the restoration. Most importantly, he would return home after every assignment. No years apart. No lonely apartment. No marriage sacrificed for success. Ji-hoon stared at the documents in disbelief. This wasn't necessary, he whispered. Chairman Kwon smiled. No. It was overdue. He looked toward the photographs hanging on the wall. When I was your age, I believed success demanded that I keep choosing work over the people I loved. I became wealthy. I became respected. But every achievement echoed inside an empty house. His voice grew quieter. I don't want another young couple to confuse sacrifice with love the way I once did. Silence settled over the room. Not an awkward silence. A grateful one. Ji-hoon slowly reached for Soo-jin's hand. This time, neither of them was choosing between love and ambition. For the first time, they were choosing both. The apartment door closed gently behind Chairman Kwon. For several moments, neither Ji-hoon nor Soo-jin moved. The cream-colored envelope rested quietly in Soo-jin's hands. It felt strangely light. Yet, its weight seemed to fill the entire room. Ji-hoon looked at her and smiled gently. Open it. She carefully unfolded the letter inside. There were no legal documents. No contracts. No financial agreements. Only a single handwritten page. At the top, to Kang Soo-jin. She began reading. Chairman Kwon wrote about the woman he had loved decades earlier. How he had spent years believing success could replace the happiness he had lost. How every award, every company, and every fortune had only made his regrets louder. Then the letter changed. He wrote about Soo-jin. Not because she reminded him of the woman he had lost, but because she reminded him that genuine kindness still existed in the world. He thanked her. Not for accepting his invitation. Not for trusting him. But for helping him realize that his greatest legacy should never be another skyscraper or another company. It should be creating opportunities that strengthen families instead of separating them. At the bottom of the letter, one final sentence. When history remembers us, it will never ask how much we owned. It will ask, whose lives became better because we were here. Tears slowly filled Soo-jin's eyes. She folded the letter carefully. Not because it was valuable, but because it had become something far more meaningful. A reminder that true success was measured by the lives we protected. Weeks later, the restoration project officially began. Ji-hoon divided his time between Seoul and the mountain village. Soo-jin documented every stage of the restoration through her photography. Together, they transformed forgotten buildings into living history. Their work attracted architects, historians, and visitors from around the world. One autumn afternoon, months after the project was completed, the restored village welcomed its first festival. Children laughed through the stone pathways. Traditional music echoed beneath colorful lanterns. Families explored homes that had nearly disappeared forever. Standing quietly beneath an old ginkgo tree, Chairman Kwon watched from a distance. He didn't step onto the stage. He didn't ask for recognition. He simply smiled. Because for the first time in decades, he no longer felt alone. Across the courtyard, Ji-hoon reached for Soo-jin's hand. She looked toward the village they had helped save. Then toward the man who had changed all of their lives, not with wealth, but with wisdom. Sometimes, the greatest gift a person can offer isn't money. It's the courage to change someone else's future without asking them to lose themselves in return. Winter arrived quietly in Seoul. Snow covered the rooftops of the restored Hanok village, transforming the ancient streets into a breathtaking landscape of white and silver. What had once been abandoned now welcomed thousands of visitors each week. Students came to learn. Families came to reconnect with history. Artists came searching for inspiration. The village had become more than a restoration project. It had become a symbol of hope. Inside the Seoul Arts and Heritage Center, a ceremony was underway. Architects, historians, journalists, and cultural leaders from around the world gathered beneath crystal chandeliers. On the giant screen behind the stage appeared photographs documenting the village's remarkable transformation. The audience applauded as Kim Ji-hoon and Kang Soo-jin were invited onto the stage together. Neither of them expected personal recognition. They believed the buildings deserved the applause, not the people who restored them. The host announced that the project had been selected to receive the International Heritage Preservation Excellence Award, recognizing not only architectural achievement but also the preservation of culture through storytelling and community. Ji-hoon accepted the award with humility. But before he could leave the stage, he paused. Looking toward the audience, he quietly invited Chairman Kwon to join them. The hall fell silent. Chairman Kwon hesitated. Recognition had never been his goal. Yet the audience rose to its feet, applauding the man whose vision had saved an entire piece of Korean history. Slowly, he walked onto the stage. Ji-hoon placed the award into Chairman Kwon's hands. The older man's eyes filled with tears. 4 decades. He had built companies that made headlines. Yet nothing had ever moved him as deeply as this simple act of gratitude. At that moment, 3 lives that had once crossed by chance became forever connected, not by wealth, but by kindness. Spring returned to Seoul. Cherry blossoms painted the city in soft shades of pink and white. The restored village flourished with life. Schools organized educational visits. Young architects volunteered to learn traditional restoration techniques. Photographers traveled from across Asia to capture its quiet beauty. What had once been forgotten had become a place where new memories were created every day. One peaceful afternoon, Chairman Kwon invited Ji-hoon and Soo-jin to the foundation headquarters. His office looked different. The walls that once displayed corporate awards were now covered with photographs of restored villages, smiling volunteers, craftsmen at work, and families enjoying the cultural sights. His priorities had changed. So had his heart. He handed them a simple folder. Inside were the legal documents establishing the Kwon Heritage Fellowship. Every year, the foundation would sponsor talented architects, photographers, historians, and artisans who lacked the financial means to pursue their dreams. Ji-hoon looked up in surprise. Soo-jin quietly turned the pages. At the bottom of the final document, they found something unexpected. Chairman Kwon had named them as the program's permanent directors. Not because they were the most accomplished, but because they understood something many successful people forgot. Dreams should never come at the cost of the people you love. Chairman Kwon smiled gently. My generation spent decades building companies. He looked toward the blooming cherry trees outside his window. I hope yours spends the next decades building people. Neither Ji-hoon nor Soo-jin answered immediately. Some moments deserved silence. Some promises didn't need words. Ji-hoon simply extended his hand. Chairman Kwon accepted it with both of his own. Across the desk, Soo-jin quietly raised her camera. Without anyone noticing, she captured the moment. Not for history books. Not for newspapers. But because she knew. The most meaningful photographs were never planned. They happened when people forgot the camera was there. 3 years passed. Seoul changed around them. New towers rose where old buildings had once stood. Entire neighborhoods transformed. Technology moved faster. People became busier. But in the mountains outside the city, the restored village remained almost untouched. It became the place Ji-hoon and Soo-jin returned to whenever life became too loud. Their marriage had changed too. Not because their love had weakened, but because they had learned how to protect it. Ji-hoon no longer measured success by how much work he could carry. Soo-jin no longer believed loving someone meant silently sacrificing her own happiness. They had learned to speak before resentment had the chance to grow. They traveled together, worked together, sometimes disagreed, sometimes laughed until neither could breathe. But they never again allowed an opportunity to make them afraid of choosing each other. One quiet spring morning, Soo-jin walked through the restored village carrying her camera. She stopped beneath the same ginkgo tree where she had once stood with Chairman Kwon. Ji-hoon approached from behind. He was carrying 2 cups of coffee. She smiled. The scene felt almost identical to a photograph she had taken years earlier. Only this time, there was something different. Ji-hoon was holding a small envelope. Soo-jin looked at it curiously. Inside was a photograph. Her photograph. The one she had secretly taken at the foundation office years earlier. The image showed Chairman Kwon shaking Ji-hoon's hand. But Ji-hoon had added something to the back. A handwritten note. You taught me that the greatest thing I could build wasn't a career, it was a life worth coming home to. Soo-jin read it twice. Then she looked up at him. Her eyes filled with tears. Not because she was sad. Because she suddenly remembered how close they had once come to losing the future they were standing inside. Ji-hoon gently pulled her into an embrace. Around them, cherry blossoms drifted through the morning air. The village was alive. Their marriage was alive. And the dream they once feared would divide them had become the very thing that brought them closer. The restaurant overlooked the Han River, exactly where the city lights reflected across the dark water like scattered stars. Chairman Kwon was already waiting. He looked older now. His silver hair had become almost completely white. But his expression was peaceful. When Ji-hoon and Soo-jin approached the table, he stood slowly. For a moment, the three simply looked at one another. Three people whose lives had once collided because of an extraordinary offer. Three people who had walked away from that moment carrying completely different lessons. Soo-jin placed a small framed photograph on the table. It was the picture she had taken years earlier. Chairman Kwon shaking Ji-hoon's hand. Behind them, the restored village glowed beneath autumn lanterns. Chairman Kwon stared at it. Then smiled. I remember that day. Soo-jin nodded. So do we. But the photograph wasn't the only thing they had brought. Ji-hoon opened another folder. Inside was the latest report from the Kwon Heritage Fellowship. More than 300 young architects, photographers, historians, and traditional craftsmen had received scholarships. Several had already completed restoration projects of their own. Some had returned to villages their families had abandoned. Others had started workshops teaching traditional Korean craftsmanship to younger generations. Chairman Kwon slowly turned the pages. His hands trembled. Not from weakness. From emotion. He had spent most of his life believing that wealth was measured by what a person accumulated. Now, he finally understood. A fortune could disappear in one generation. A building could collapse. A company could fail. But an opportunity given to another person could continue multiplying long after the person who gave it was gone. He closed the folder, then looked at Ji-hoon. You two gave me something I thought I had lost forever. Ji-hoon smiled. What? Proof that I still had time to become a better man. Silence settled around the table. Outside, a boat moved slowly across the Han River. Seoul continued shining. Soo-jin reached across the table and placed her hand over Chairman Kwon's. No words were necessary. Because sometimes, the deepest apologies aren't spoken. They're lived. And sometimes, the greatest love stories aren't about choosing between love and ambition. They're about discovering that true love should never require you to destroy yourself to prove it. Years later, people would remember the restored village. They would remember the scholarships. They would remember the photographs. They would remember Chairman Kwon's fortune being used to preserve a part of Korea that might otherwise have disappeared. But Soo-jin remembered something much simpler. A small apartment. A broken dining table. 2 cups of tea. And an unopened envelope that had once threatened to change everything. She had learned that night that temptation doesn't always arrive looking evil. Sometimes, it arrives looking like the dream you've prayed for your entire life. And the greatest test isn't whether you can resist temptation. It's whether you can recognize what is truly priceless before you lose it. Ji-hoon reached for Soo-jin's hand beneath the table. Their fingers intertwined. Outside the restaurant window, the Han River carried the reflections of Seoul toward the horizon. And somewhere beyond the city, an old village continued standing beneath the mountains. Preserved. Loved. Alive. Just like the marriage that had once been tested by an offer powerful enough to destroy it. But didn't. Because in the end, they discovered something money could never buy. A life worth coming home to.